The Messerschmitt 109 was Germany's best-known fighter of the Second World War. It is striking testimony to Willy Messerschmitt's design team that this first-generation monoplane fighter was still in production and development right up to the spring of 1945. By this time, well over 30,000 had been built, making the 109 the fighter produced in larger numbers than any other before or since. The 109 resulted from a pre-war requirement for a modern fighter with retractable landing gear and a low monoplane wing of cantilever construction. The first prototype flew in September 1935, powered by a Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine. But on later prototypes, the Junkers Jumo 210 was used. Development was typical of the German system at that time, and the 109 made several record-breaking flights, as well as enjoying a number of competition successes. The early production B and C variants were used in small numbers but with considerable success during the Spanish Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 39. These versions paved the way for the 109D with a more powerful Daimler-Benz engine. This was armed with a 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub and a pair of machine guns in the forward fuselage decking above the engine. The first variant to enter service in substantial numbers was the 109E, generally known as the Emil. This first appeared in 1938 and was the mainstay of the Luftwaffe fighter arm throughout the campaigns in Poland and France during the Battle of Britain and the subsequent campaigns in North Africa, the Balkans, and the early stages of the war in Russia. This had formidable extra armament in the form of two 20mm cannon mounted in the wings. Survivability was enhanced by the use of self-sealing fuel tanks and the provision of armor protection for the pilot. The 109E was powered by a 1,050 horsepower Daimler-Benz 601A inline engine with fuel injection, which gave a maximum speed of 348 miles an hour and a range of 410 miles. The Messerschmitt 109 had a very distinctive appearance with its square-cut flying surfaces, strut-braced tailplane, narrow track landing gear and heavily framed cockpit canopy. The narrow track of the landing gear, which retracted outward into wheel wells under the wings, simplified production but made the fighter difficult to handle while taxiing on the ground. The cockpit was also rather narrow, making it something of a squeeze for larger pilots, while the heavy cockpit framing did nothing to improve vision. This was a serious defect in a fighter, and a revised canopy was eventually introduced later in the war. Spurred on by mounting losses, particularly to the Royal Air Force's Spitfire Mark V, the Germans responded with an uprated version of the 109. The gradually changing nature of the air war is reflected in the fact that while the Emil had been conceived as an offensive fighter, the new 109F was planned more for the defensive role, with emphasis on rate of climb and service ceiling rather than speed and firepower. Thus, although the aircraft was powered by a 1,200 horsepower Daimler-Benz engine, which increased the top speed to 373 miles an hour, it only had armament of a single 15mm cannon and two machine guns. Even though more than 2,000 of the F variant were produced during 1941 to 42, it was nowhere nearly as popular with its pilots as the Emil. Generally known as the Gustav, the 109G was the definitive variant. 23,500 were built by factories in Germany, Austria, Hungary and Romania between 1942 and the end of the war. Early Gustavs were powered by 1,475 horsepower Daimler-Benz 605 engines, but these were later uprated to 1,850 horsepower with methanol water or nitrous oxide injection. This gave vastly improved performance throughout the flight envelope, with top speed at high altitude increased from 406 to 428 miles an hour. Early Gustavs had a single 20mm cannon and a pair of rifle-caliber machine guns, but later models had 3 cannon and a pair of heavy 13mm machine guns. Some machines even featured a 30mm cannon in the nose, while field conversion kits were provided to allow the aircraft to be adapted for the ground attack role with additional underwing armament. Range was also increased by the provision of a ventral drop tank. The Gustav was used on every German front, and in the right hands was a potent fighter in most air-to-air situations. Messerschmitt introduced the K version in 1944. This had a 2,000 horsepower Daimler-Benz engine, which increased top speed to 452 miles an hour. But the type was only produced in comparatively small numbers before the war came to an end. In dogfights against British Hurricanes and Spitfires, the 109 had a decided advantage because of the fuel injection system used. This allowed the fighter to be nosed over in a negative G maneuver without the engine stalling. By contrast, the British fighters had Rolls-Royce Merlin engines with conventional carburetors. This meant the engine would cut out if a Spitfire or Hurricane tried to follow a 109. Instead, they had to half roll and then dive in order to preserve positive G, which gave the German pilots a good chance to break away and lose their pursuers. The heavy armament of the 109G and K made them formidable interceptors, and Allied bombers suffered a terrible toll at their hands. This was particularly true of the American B-17s and other bombers which generally maintained their policy of daylight bombing throughout the war. The agile 109s, their inline engines and slim wings presenting a small and elusive target for the bombers' defensive machine guns, were able to get in close and deliver a devastating hail of fire. The 109 was flown by most of the German aces, including Adolf Galland and Werner Mulders. The top-scoring ace of all time was Erich Hartmann, who racked up 352 victories, flying 109s before being finally shot down and captured by the Russians. The Messerschmitt 109, although outclassed towards the end, remained a highly competitive fighter throughout the war. The K variant pushed its design potential to the limit, but even in 1945, an experienced 109 pilot could tackle the best of Allied bombers and fighters with every hope of success. By this time, though, many of the most experienced pilots were dead or in captivity, and the Allies were encountering novices with only a few hours flying experience who were unable to extract the best from their machines. The Messerschmitt 110 is now remembered chiefly as a radar-equipped night fighter. Indeed, it's true that this poorly conceived aircraft found its most effective role in a guise for which it was not